Good afternoon. This is the Dismantling Racism Network of Province 5 of the Episcopal Church on November 7th, 2024. We are thrilled with today's program, and Debbie will open us in prayer.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Oh God, our times are in your hand. Bless the conversation today as we hear about efforts, about history and efforts for Indigenous folks. Bless our ears as we hear that. Bless our understanding, because that's important. Give us the strength and the resolve to do the work that you have given us to do as we stand the way Jesus did with those who stood on the margins of society. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Leora, we're so grateful that you're with us today. If you could introduce yourself, tell us about yourself, and help us understand a bit of the work that you've been doing.
Absolutely. Well, bonjour, Gukina, and Dinaway Maganaduk, Ndishnakas, Misko Paganikwe, Gea, Leora Tadgerson, Shakanashimun, Mikanakandodam, Gea, Spiming, Donjaba, Mino, Gnojaklaning, Gaia, Wikomkong, Kinogode. So, hey, everybody, my English name is Leora Tadgerson, and I serve here as the Director of Reparations and Justice in the Diocese of Northern Michigan. And my Ojibwe name, my Anishinaabe name is Red Pipe Woman. My family is of the Turtle Clan, and I am Anishinaabe and Finnish and Sami, the indigenous people of Finland. And for the Anishinaabe side, we are all three fires. So the Anishinaabe people are the Great Lakes indigenous folks, and we are of the Potawatomi, the Odawa. Sometimes you'll hear Ottawa, like Ottawa National Forest, and Ojibwe. Sometimes you'll hear that anglicized form Chippewa. So all three. And I'm here today to talk about the different work and the capacities that are happening here in the Great Lakes and then in the greater Episcopal Church when it comes to Indigenous advocacy, especially talking about the work that's starting, just bubbling up about in response to the Native American boarding school systems. And it's quite different, the work that's happening nationally than the work that's happening within the state of Michigan, but they have so many wonderful overlaps and it's terribly exciting. As hard as the work is on a person's heart, it's just as rewarding and just as healing. And I just want to start by saying thank you so much for curating this space and bringing folks in to have this conversation. This is happening more and more right in the state of Michigan and now in our province. So I'm just very thankful that folks are stepping up and at this wonderful era where we are able to listen with open hearts and open minds and strategic hearts and minds, which I love. So for the work that we do here in the Diocese of Northern Michigan, we are at a point of, like I mentioned, listening. We are creating these different or continuing these different relationships with the native tribes of the Upper Peninsula. And here we've got 5 different tribes. In the state of Michigan, we have 12. But here in our diocesan jurisdiction, we're trying to really understand the Native American experience, right? That way we understand for our fellow Native people, what is it that are the obstacles that we as a church or individual congregations even, and as individuals of congregations can be doing in allyship, but authentic allyship. And how do we avoid that savior syndrome complex that is so present in some spaces? One thing that we've really enjoyed is the traveling exhibit. And the traveling exhibit is this fantastic, heartfelt work, a collaborative work we began with the Great Lakes Peace Center and the diocese here, and also Northern Michigan University. And we've got 8 different interviews with boarding school survivors, and they talk about their Michigan-based experience. And not that survivors had solely Michigan-based experiences, right? If you're a resident of Michigan and you're native, you didn't only go to Michigan. For example, I had in my family, we have folks from both sides of the border. We have Canadian family, First Nations from Macoimacong on Manitoulin Island, and they had been displaced here to Michigan. So they attended places, Holy Childhood in Harbor Springs in Michigan, which was the very last boarding school to close in the entire nation in 1983. And then we had family on my other side of the native genes, on the other side, on my grandfather's side, he was US based. So they went to Mount Pleasant, then they were shipped over to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, right? And so it wasn't necessarily just here where folks went. And so we wanted to understand, I did just say 1983. I know that was like yesterday, right? And in Canada, it was in 1996 that I had finally closed in a very northerly place, but 1996, that's not that long ago. So with our traveling exhibit, we want to be able to offer this literature in a physical space, right? So you can walk through and understand colonization from an Indigenous lens. You can read the different eras and understand what happened, right? Because it's not very often that Indigenous voices get to speak for ourselves. But we're in this amazing and very powerful and supported era where we have that safety, both physical safety, but emotional and spiritual safety. That's really important. And the diocese and the Episcopal Church at large is doing a really good job at making sure that that continues, which I'm very grateful for. And the thing that is really helpful when it comes to the traveling exhibit is you can go on our website, which is live now, and you can go to the different interviews and watch them from your home, which is really good because this content is very difficult on the heart, right? So sometimes folks don't want to sit and watch something with a crowd of people. You can absolutely choose to sit and watch it, right, with your congregation, for example, for a training. You could do that on a Sunday, or you can just be with your family and watch it in your home or wherever. We've been traveling, gosh, Kathy is a part of the traveling exhibit, and we've been traveling over 3,000 miles just in the past year. It's been pretty amazing. Hey, Kathy. It's gone everywhere from General Convention to the province gathering to fully tribal spaces and even only church spaces. So it's really been able to navigate quite elegantly into very different demographics, which is needed because when we have, for example, an only tribal space where we're talking about boarding schools, that's going to be a whole different set of questions and support systems that we need than only a complete dominant society church space, right? We're going to be comforting those different demographics of people in different ways, which is why we always try to understand before we set up shop. We need to understand, are there culturally inclusive harm reduction aspects put into place? Because if somebody does, like an elder or even a youth, somebody gets triggered, a Native person gets triggered, we want to make sure that they're taken care of afterwards, right? They need a debriefing session. They need somebody on staff, somebody physically there to either smudge them up or even just to talk them through. These are really, really important things that we need to be responsible for when we're curating these difficult conversations. Kathy, before I go on, did you want to say anything about the traveling exhibit since you're such a big part of the team?
No, I think well, just a little background for people that might be looking at doing, similar things or finding ways to get the funding. This all started with a UTO grant back in 2018. So that's kind of where the idea originated from. And then from there, we had additional grant funding from, was it Becoming Beloved Community Grants? I can't remember now off the top of my head, but yeah, so we did get some financial assistance through grant funding to help with that, and hopefully we'll continue to look at other options so we can keep adding additional stories and for the expenses that it takes for traveling all over the place.
Absolutely, because that does get to be a pretty penny. We're just getting now into the phase where folks are trying to book out, right, quite a few months, and are wondering how long can we have this for? What's a good duration? How far are you willing to travel? Are you going to be able to have staff come and accommodate? Because we do try to understand what every situation is and what that learning experience needs to be. Because like I mentioned, it's going to be different from a powwow setting versus a panel presentation of people that are just coming into this conversation for the first time. So we do try to understand what every community is going to need. We have done spaces where our bishop, Rayford Ray, has been able to come in and excuse me, and talk about his experiences as a bishop, right? As a white man living in Anishinaabe territory, what his roles and responsibilities are as an authentic ally, and give honestly his apology, which is also on the website, which is very powerful. And that's been really positive. But we've also had these really amazing experiences where the people that we are in collaboration with have the emotional maturity to say, we actually want the bishop here yet. We want to be able to heal and take our time with this. And that takes a lot of guts. That takes a lot of bravery, right? First off, they're connecting with a church, which sometimes is difficult for Native nations to do to even start with, but then utilizing the equipment and kind of denying access for the staffing. It's even though it's a difficult thing, that's a good thing. That's progress. It's a very interesting aspect of bridge building, and there's so many different capacities when it comes to bridge building, right?
And I think just the other thing, Leora, really quickly to add is that just in the whole process of how this came to be, from where it started from in, you know, writing this grant and whatever, I think the thing that really truly made it into the amazing project that it turned out to be is that through trial and error and our own learning and cultural competency issues and everything else, is that we learned very early on that we needed to talk less and listen more and allow this to be Indigenous led. And that made all the difference, you know, meeting Leora at racial justice conference, and I'll never forget that first meeting when we told you that we were connected with the Episcopal Diocese in Northern Michigan, and that you couldn't believe a church was actually interested in doing this work, you know, and it just went from there. And the partnerships and the trust that has been built over the years has been so amazing and so incredible to see, you know, but it takes time, you know, and that's the thing, you know, in our quote white way of doing things, you know, you write this grant and you have a year timeline. And so you're supposed to get the money, and within a year, here are your goals, get it all done, you know, and obviously that didn't happen, but it needed to take the time that it took to get to where it is today. And so I think, you know, that was the other lesson for us is to allow that time and go with it being Indigenous led, and that really truly made a huge difference in how it turned. I mean, it turned out better than I could have ever imagined when we wrote the grant. So that was really a nice way to see that all come about.
Yeah, well said. And it's been historic, really. You know, a really good example, one that I love sharing, is when we were able to go to Keweenaw Bay Indian community, right at the real northernly part of northern Michigan. We were able to bring the exhibit there, and that was a complete 180 from our very first meeting with Keweenaw Bay Indian community, because our crew was able to get on the agenda for the tribal council meeting and introduce ourselves and talk about the work that we would like to do, but really ask permission to do the work with the tribe, right? And I'll tell you, it was intimidating. That tribal chair looked at us straight in the eye and said, "What are you doing here? Don't waste my time." And so we had to really prove that we were the real deal, and we were committed long term. And a few years go by, and here we are able to set up in their powwow in a sacred space and have it really be an interfaith meeting of the hearts and the minds. It was incredible. And it turns out that Bishop Rayford Ray, was able to go in the circle, in the powwow circle, alongside one of their council members and the boarding school survivors and dance in that circle during an honor song. It was beautiful. I mean, as a young girl, I would have never imagined something like that would take place, but here we are, right? And it's spaces like this, conversations like this, that are going to make sure that these keep happening. So that is one awesome initiative here. Another aspect of the work is we try to keep, apologies, I think they're vacuuming upstairs. We try to keep research really, really on the forefront of our minds. And so we've been really working hard to see what are the different documents that are still physically available that we should be digitizing that has to do with the Episcopal Church and boarding schools or mission schools or anything with Indian people and our church, especially our territory. So we've been really working hard to make sure that we're turning over all leaves to understand the material from a non-biased point of view, because we have to understand the history, even if it's difficult history. And there has been quite a few pieces digitized, so we tried to keep a count of those. The national work that ties in to Michigan, which is terribly exciting to me, is there was a letter issued earlier this year, I want to say in February, and it went to all the Episcopal bishops of the nation. And it was to invite dioceses in to that archival discovery work for their individual diocese. And that has been really successful so far. We've got over, 30 different dioceses that are ready to begin the work, saying we're dedicated. We want to open up our vaults, right, so to say, and we want to understand our own history. And we want to do it alongside tribes, hand in hand, right? Full transparency. And that is a game changer. If we had every denomination with that dedication, we would have so much healing. We'd have so much healing. We're going to get there one day, but we're starting right now. And the state of Michigan, I am just overjoyed. We're going to, all the dioceses are coming together, and we're going to have that setting together. There's a wonderful woman that we've hired on. Her name is Dr. Veronica Passfield, and she is taking the lead for the committee work in archival specialist work. She will be sitting down with both the folks in the diocese, whether that be an archivist or the religious leadership, and kind of guiding folks through that basic 101. How do we start this? Where do we look? What kind of forms are important? How do we digitize? What does funding structures look like, right? Because all of these things are very important aspects. Nobody likes to talk about funding, but we got to talk about funding. And that's an aspect about the larger church, right? The National Episcopal Church is going to be setting aside funding from their 2.5 million to be able to fund different dioceses to actually do this work. Another cool thing is if a diocese does not have an archivist, which a lot of them don't, we're learning, we're inviting the idea to have the tribal archivist be able to come in and work hand in hand with that diocese, which is really, that's powerful in the way that the church will be supporting tribal data sovereignty, right? Tribal data sovereignty. And that's something that we're able to have, we're developing a policy for the church so that we not only understand what tribal data sovereignty is, but we're able to practice it and honor it. It's something that has been far, far overlooked, but our tribal relatives, I mean, survivors are still here today, right? Their stories that are untold deserve to be taken care of, and their records from this difficult era deserves to be taken care of, but according to their needs. We're done with that era of assuming that we understand what's best, right, for the red man. That has been written down so many times in these difficult papers that we're reading over and over again. So now we're in this fantastic era where we're asking the tribes to take charge of this beautiful and incredible movement of truth telling and healing. Next week, we're going to be meeting together over in Phoenix, and that'll be two groups. That'll be the A127 Commission and the MW062 Committee. Now, they're two different entities, but we work hand in hand. We have very similar task items that we need to do, and they overlap quite a bit, but there are individual pieces that we need to work on individually. Some of the stuff that we have in mind as we develop and solidify the strategic plan next week is going to be a multi-phase strategic plan, of course. We would love to start everything at the same time, but let's be honest, there are only 24 hours in a day, and there's only so many espressos that we can have. So we are going to be beginning in 2025. We'll be starting an oral histories project. It'll be very similar to the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition method, where we want to go into a territory, of course, with tribal permission, and the tribe will lead this, and be able to have these stories preserved. We'll be having boarding school survivors from Episcopal entities, and they'll be able to preserve those stories. And we'll also be creating a new archival aspect to it, where all of these documents that are being digitized, they need to be housed in an appropriate space. And it becomes a bit more difficult than a lot of archival pieces that exist because, again, these survivors are still here, right? This is still their story. And not everybody's comfortable with going over to Austin, Texas, and being able to access their records, right? Their personal records. That's where the tribal data sovereignty piece is coming into play. And we're going to really solidify a policy that's very respectful, responsible, and that's going to really have longevity when it comes to these very important documents. Now, not everything looks as exciting and fast moving within this work. And what I tell you is I'm gonna do a quick share screen. This is when we're gonna get super nerdy. Share. Gonna move my oh. So this is what a lot of my day looks like, everybody. A lot of spreadsheets, even though we work with survivors a whole lot and we're doing a lot of face-to-face initiatives, this is what a lot of our days look like. And what you're looking at here is A127 and MW062 tasks in progress assessment. What we've done is we've taken these two different resolutions for the committee and the commission and put those task items on there, color-coded them, so we can understand what task items are from this exact resolution and what are from the other one, right? And how do they overlap? That way we're able to prioritize what it is that we can do together and quickly. But not only that, we also have the federal recommendations from Brian Newland's first and second report, which, oh, if any of you fellow nerds are out there, this is amazing. There are some overlap, as you can see, for both reports and both of the resolution task items, but not everything, right? Not everything's going to overlap, as you'll see. So that's where we really need to be able to be thorough in our viewpoint of what is it that tribal nations need, and the church, what does the church need to be able to do this truth-telling initiative. If you are interested in where the Episcopal Archives Department or area is right now, you can go to this website and look exactly where their current report is at, which I think is at 34 different Indian boarding schools. And you can scroll through the different states, see where they were at, what years they were active. And it's not just 34, right? This is their very, very basic first report to see what they have in their archival records. We are having our archivists go into the National Archives, which has been wonderfully successful to be able to get some more schools and more information. And we've been able to meet with different states. So far, we've been able to meet with different dioceses, like in Alaska. We've had some in Utah, Arizona, oh, sugar, and a couple of others, but they've been very different. Every single meeting has been different. Every skill set is different. So that's what I tell folks. If this is an intimidating process, don't worry about it. You got a buddy, right? You got a wonderful team that is ready to bring you into this in a non-judgmental manner, because we are working really hard to let go of that shame and the stigma of the boarding school era. Of course, like I tell folks, it is good to feel that. It's good to feel the hurt, the sadness, the shame, and everything that comes along with institutional memory and the boarding school era. But we also have to learn to compartmentalize that so that we can be our best selves as individuals and as congregations and as dioceses, to be active in this supporting initiative, in this movement. So with all of that, I'm going to see if I have more screens that I want to show you. Yes. I'm going to do one more screen share, and I'm going to actually put this into the chat for folks. And this is the Federal Indian Boarding School Investigative Reports. This is volume 2. A lot of folks have had access to, volume 1. But I'm going to put volume 2 right into our chat for folks to be able to access and read. It's really interesting, and it's very thorough, really well done, with the caveat that they didn't actually put Episcopal entities in with it. If you look in their resources, the Episcopal Archives wasn't cited. And how interesting is that, right? We're in this very interesting era within research, where we're finally bringing church and state under the same umbrella, which is very controversial at times and very hard. But we're realizing, it's even noted in Brian Newland's report, that the very beginning, the very first Indian agents that started the boarding school system were appointed by diocesan folks, right? They were different denominational people that said, these are the people that we want. And they went along with it. So there is so much overlap with the church and state that we're we're combing through and understanding how the infrastructure was created and how the Episcopal Church is liable, right? Where that accountability aspect, or aspects, many different accountability aspects are. Because if we don't understand how we are responsible, how are we supposed to really authentically come into a space where we put together infrastructure of restorative justice? We can't. We absolutely can't. So this history is really, really important, and we're doing a super thorough job of turning over all the stones, right? It's hard work to do, but we've got a really great team, and it's only going to be building. So with all that, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions or comments that folks have. If not, I'm going to give you another resource because it's super good. I'm going to move this over to see my screen. One piece that I binged like a Netflix series. Oh my word. This is called The Spirit of Missions. I'm going to put this into our chat also. Now, The Spirit of Missions is a great, great archival resource that has been digitized. And I recommend this one to all of the folks that are saying, I really want to get involved. Where do I even start, right? I know nothing about this. I say, well, why don't you pull up, oh, sugar. Oh, there we go. Why don't you pull up The Spirit of Missions and just begin to familiarize yourself. Like, for example, you can go into any one of these issues. How about I'll pick 1927? Let's go into July. And this helps people understand the viewpoint in time of the Episcopal Church and individual dioceses. You can go into a different state. You can even do fine. Let's put in the word Indian. And you can see how many different times it's cited. And then you can start to read about the different historical contexts of the Indians in the native people, right, in a certain area and what that history was. And this is a really great way to expand upon what the archival research already has, because there are states that they haven't even looked into, like Wisconsin, for example, plays a huge part in some of the boarding school work. All right. So stop that share and offer that to you. And now with that, does anyone have any questions? All right, I'll ask questions for folks. Has anyone started their archival work with their own diocese? What does that look like? Or what does the curiosity look like within your homes? Yeah, Debbie. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. We've got a very interesting thing in our diocese, a a DMin dissertation that was written, and this is concerning not Native Americans, but African Americans in the Diocese of Ohio. And it was written in 1978 as part of this Raleigh Hairston's DMin requirements. And chapter 4, which is case studies, we use that in our Seeing the Face of God in Each Other 2-day Dismantling Racism workshop. And it's not pleasant reading. It's difficult because the story, what's there is not anything, for the most part, for the diocese to be proud of, but it is our story. And when we talk in Becoming Beloved Community about telling the truth, it's all right there. And that was actually in our archives. It has not been digitized. You can't find it on a literature search. And
Wow.
but that actually came from some work that Trinity Cathedral was doing into our archives, looking for places, looking for things in minutes and that kind of, for things where we needed to think about repairing the breach. Or I'm going to use the word reparations that a lot of places don't like. In fact, I've been told not to use it at my church. But
Wow.
yeah, right. But we've where we have work to do in ways to, so I'm, like I said, I'm using the term healing the breach. I'm trying to teach myself to use that, but they mean the same thing. And so that's kind of where we are. There's probably a lot more work to be done, but it's a start.
Absolutely. Wow. And thank you for starting that work. That does sound hard on the heart. I'm glad that you
It
have.
is very hard. And particularly given that 3 of the traditional African American congregations still exist today. And so it's tough stuff. Absolutely. But it's also, like I said, it's also a piece of knowing the truth.
Absolutely. And how can we understand how to fully support all of our communities if we aren't truthful, right? If we don't own up to it, how can we create good initiatives off of an unknowing circumstance? We can't. I'm glad that you are all learning that truth. It's powerful.
I have a wondering. I'm wondering, like, how in our diocese we have. I'm in Chicago, and in our diocese we have, a task force on the legacy of slavery report. That we passed a resolution and tasked all the congregations with the diocese of reading the report and and also tasked them with doing some anti-racism work and reporting back. And it's kind of difficult to get folks to engage the work, and I'm wondering about engagement, how you get people to engage voluntarily. Because it's hard stuff, and because it's so hard, I feel like, there are people who would rather just avoid it. So I'm just wondering about, engagement and what you do to, get people to engage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that question because that's a hard question, isn't it? If you put mandatory work on the table, nobody's gonna want to come around, you know?
Yeah, right.
And especially when it is this really hard on the heart content, and it can be really uncomfortable. There's so much stigma that is around this type of work, and especially the work that you're mentioning. That's really difficult stuff. I would say what we've found to be helpful in the committees, at least, is make the work relatable, right? If we understand the individuals in our crew and we understand their stories, their families, their demographics, and what their obstacles are, we can make the work relatable and specific to them. They'll want to do the work. They'll want to take part and take ownership of the work, That's what we've really had to do because we've got maybe we have a lot of people in between the commission and the committee, and not a whole lot of participation. It's a few rock stars holding it together with a lot of commissions, committees, right? We all know that. But that's been the number one way to make sure that things get done is we need to find those people who relate to this work. And but community wise, that's a whole different beast, isn't it? That's a whole different beast. The community
Yeah.
work is where the real challenge is. And for me, as an Indigenous person doing this work, I've had the most success when it comes from a lens of understanding. I need first for folks to understand the why behind the work. We have to understand, why are we doing this? Why am I doing this as a congregation? Or why am I, as an individual, coming into this room with my congregation to even talk about this? And then how can I go as an advocate and actually do something in the real world to continue this lifestyle, right? And we have to really consider it a lifestyle. We have to make it into our everyday, regular lives instead of just, this is an initiative that I'm going to do in November. I'm gonna be done, right? It's Native American Heritage Month. Check mark. That's right. I'm done. Like, we have to make it part of our church. We have to make it part of our community, or it's just gonna be a check mark, which performative advocacy is not advocacy.
Actually, that's a good quote.
Yeah,
Thank you
that
for
just made
that.
me think, Leora, just as an example of that. So, we had, started on the traveling exhibit project back in 2018 as part of the Justice and Peace Committee throughout the diocese. And so people that were more involved on the committee work and were aware of what was going on, but overall throughout the diocese, then this was before the exhibit was actually ready to start traveling. But I remember, boy, it must have been three years ago, maybe, that Bishop Ray just wanted to recognize two of the individuals that shared their stories of their experiences at Indian boarding school for the traveling exhibit, and he wanted to recognize them at the convention and give them the Peace and Justice Award that he gives out every year. And I had people come up to me afterwards who are the most wonderful, loving, caring people in the world saying, now I get it. Because they shared part of their story with the people that were at the convention. And they're like, yeah, I heard people talking about this and I really didn't get what it meant. And but then to have them there, have the survivors there sharing their stories, then it clicked. And then they finally understood the why. And I think that was a big aha moment for me too, because when you're in it, I mean, we all know that's why we're here and feel so passionate about doing the work. But for other people that are just hearing bits and pieces, it's really important to help them understand the why part of it. Yeah.
So well said, Kathy.
Thank you both. That's helpful.
Yeah, Wendy, it looks like you have a hand up.
Yes, so you started this work in one diocese and then it evolved to grow into going to the national church, or was it started from national church and then to one diocese?
It was simultaneous, but not together at all, right? So the Episcopal Church itself had the resolutions, right? They're doing their thing, and they're trying to figure out who these different people are going to be on the committees, while the Diocese of Northern Michigan is beginning their work. So just like I tell folks, it's like the invention of photography. A bunch of folks were doing it at one time, but they didn't know what they were doing all together. So but that's a great question. We do utilize a lot of the methods from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, right? And we do use a lot of the methods that are being utilized here with Indigenous advocacy in the state of Michigan, and especially the diocese. So those are utilized within the national work, but yeah, they were totally separate in creation of their initiatives. Any other questions from folks or comments or ideas? What about dreams?
Just to say
go
well
ahead.
done.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I said I just wanted to say well done because I know it's hard work, and keep it up.
Thank you.
And good to see you, Kathy.
We got a good dream team, don't we, Kathy?
We sure do.
And Sister B. I don't know where Sister B went, but yep, she's on that team too. Very cool. So
Yeah.
now I would love to go ahead.
Oh, the other thing I was going to say, just to speak to Wendy's question, that just came to mind because of, when I had the opportunity to meet Felicity way back when at the Province 5 big provincial gathering, however many years ago that was. But prior to the resolutions being passed at General Convention, where the Diocese of Northern Michigan began its work was through the Episcopal Church focus on racial reconciliation as one of the 3 tenets that came out, however long ago that was. I think that was before my involvement, but that was when we wrote that grant and we're a part of the Peace and Justice Committee. That was where that first initial grant writing came from, and then the resolutions were more recent than that. But there's definite overlaps and things happening all over the place at different places and times and stuff. So
Yeah, let me go through that timeline. It's super helpful. And you made me think of Kathy, when folks are trying to understand, like, what are the actual goals that we should start thinking of that makes sense for our region, right? What makes sense for our community? I tell them, if you are unfamiliar with the United Nations rights of Indigenous peoples, ooh, take a look, right? Take a look, familiarize yourself, and try to think, are any one of these, do we not align with any one of these within our church? Is there anything that that is exempt? What do we need to work on? And then how, right? That'll really help guide. We understand a why because we're trying to help our fellow human, right? Fellow human is hurting. Our Native community, we have some of the lowest, or I should say, the highest racial disparities of any racial demographic. And it's because of the different assimilation efforts, and especially the genocidal era that was the boarding school era, right? So we have to understand all of those obstacles, and looking at the rights of Indigenous peoples is a wonderful, beautiful way to try and find different church tasks that show that you want to stand with your tribal siblings, right? To really make sure that all Native people are able to participate in society at the same level as all demographics.
mm-hmm. Well, and another resource too, in addition to the truth and healing or reconciliation efforts in Canada, where what came across to, or were what we found in our early stages of doing the work in Northern Michigan was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission through the state of Maine that happened, boy, I don't remember how long ago, but then they had done a documentary film to show the process that the state took in going through their Truth and Reconciliation Commission called Dawnland. So if you ever get a chance to see that film, actually it's part of the Sacred Ground curriculum. And that's where that came from, because Stephanie Spellers had come to one of our gatherings in Northern Michigan where we showed that for one of the first times. And I think she went back and said, we need to have this in Sacred Ground. So that's another really good resource for doing this work.
That's a cool group over there, isn't it? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
such good stuff. So I'd love to hear, so what are some dreams from folks in your home communities? What would you like to see either amplified or beginning when it comes to Indigenous advocacy from a church lens? What would you like to see? I'll give a good example to kind of begin people's trains of thought. So we were able to meet here in Michigan as sister diocese, and we had talked about Indigenous advocacy in the way of identity. And a lot of folks, like a lot of Native people, we are not fluent speakers of the Ojibwa language. Imagine that, right? And so it would be a smart thing if we just started our language acquisition. Even as adults, we can still start to learn the language of the land that we live on. And that conversation led to, there's an Episcopal summer camp that utilizes an Ojibwe word, but it's utilizing it incorrectly, grammatically incorrectly, which is just, as my 14-year-old would say, ooh, that's cringy. So in understanding more fully what the Indigenous language of our region is, we're going to be able to navigate in a lot more appropriate ways, right? So now they're in discussion of even should they be utilizing Indigenous languages for their camps, right? And then we were able to open up that conversation in a non-shame-based manner, right? Not the blame game, but just a matter of factly of exotifying, right? Of dehumanizing and romanticizing. Because that's not conversations that a lot of folks have had about Indigenous peoples. They've only seen a lot of the Westerns and all of the media pieces, but they didn't realize that they were taking part within that caricature type of lifestyle. So all of these ideas of Indigenous advocacy, letting tribal folks have a seat at the table, letting them be able to speak for their own identity. These are huge things that are just now starting at a higher capacity. And when I say that, I'm talking about from a church lens, that the church lens versus a lens of any other aspect of society is way different. And I'm sure folks are realizing that in some of the anti-racism work that you do. So it's really powerful, and a lot can be done in a sacred space. Any other last questions? I see we're coming up to the hour here. Yes, Linda.
Thanks. I happened to be on a National Constitution Center web offering the other day, and Keith Richot Jr. was there, and Matthew L.M. Fletcher to talk. Their legal experts that teach. I wonder if had any connection with them, because they were talking a lot about reclaiming the words of the what was required in the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. I never knew there was such a thing. And these are two men who are part of U of M and MSU and work in this way. So I was just curious, and I came across a book by Matthew L.M. Fletcher called Justice, the Colonizer, and the Michigan Anishinaabeg, which might be an interesting book to look at. And he's part of the Turtle. He said he was part of the Turtle Plan too.
You got to hang out with one of my cousins, huh?
Could be.
Very cool. Very
Anyway,
cool.
it's an interesting, they're doing a lot of programs for the National Constitution Center online, and you might want to check them out.
Oh, I'm gonna write that on a post-it because yeah, absolutely. And Matthew Fletcher, he's like we run in the same circles. I don't know him personally, but I really admire the work and the advocacy that he does. He's very humble in his work and he's strong in his work. And I like that. I'm really glad that you were able to attend that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh, thank you so much for putting that up there, Heather.
Absolutely. Well, I cannot express enough gratefulness for your time being here, sharing. Thank you. Thank you. So